Hello, wonderful people of English 102. This is week one feedback. It's something that I like to do periodically with our discussions. I want to give you all a shout out for the work that you're doing, and I think we're doing great work so far together. But I also like to kind of get into the discussion and wrap up our discussion because we're talking a lot about a lot of like contemporary social issues and big concepts and really important things. And I think it's important for us to kind of have a space where all of your thoughts are come together and we kind of wrap it up. And I want to like blend and kind of make everything a bit more cohesive as we end some of these conversations. With that said, I wanted to make a reminder. We're talking about Kendrick this week, and I know some of the language of Kendrick can be a bit off-putting because it's vulgar and provocative. There's a lot of cussing, but I need you to understand that that's part of the experience about language is that we don't really get to control language, but we can control our understanding. We can control how we digest that information. And that's kind of what we're doing here. We're here to digest the information to understand a differing perspective, a different life of experiences. For some of you, it's quite different. For others, it's quite similar. But regardless, we are going to try and fight through some of these issues of language and vulgarity and get to the real meat of what Kendrick discusses in his work. And it's why we follow up Kendrick after we've read Toni Morrison, because her perspectives on language and understanding is really about getting out of our comfort zones and being kind and empathetic and understanding that the language we use has power in every way that we use it. Riley, you mentioned in your post about fake news and its ability to control public opinion, which I thought was really important and valuable. And a lot of you kind of discussed social media and its influence. I think, Benjamin, you even discussed that despite there being negatives, that the positives of social media is that there's this open sharing of information that isn't like mainstream media where there's these two feuding narratives and it just creates this divisive nature between us. And I do think those are great observations by both of you, right? Is that, you both are kind of talking about the same thing, right? On one hand, you have these mainstream medias that are focused on providing these opinions to control the masses in two separate parties and turn those parties against each other. The reality is that both of the followers of those parties have a lot of the similar issues, the similar concerns. But the belief is that we're on feuding sides of the same concern. And though that there is a lot of fake news with social media, I think there is beauty in the fact that there's a lot of positive and honest and truthful information being shared in social media. I think it's up to us, not only the sharers of that information, but the digesters of that information, to make sure that we fact check and that we're putting out quality and truthful information that is void of too much bias. Dylan, I thought Dylan did a wonderful job of focusing on the importance of storytelling in Morrison's work, because storytelling is such a big part of culture. And I don't just mean black culture, I mean all cultures. Storytelling is a vital aspect of history, of experiences, of understanding. It's something that we're beginning to lose sight of, but storytelling is vitally important to our growth. I think I've learned the most about my parents, and really my friend, anybody I encounter. I feel like I learn the most by them telling me and sharing stories of their life and experiences. It really gives me an understanding of how they've come to be the people they are. And I loved, Dylan, that you connected the storytelling to the music, because that's why we're listening to music this week, because there's so much storytelling in music, with Kendrick. And, what I want us to understand is that music is a source of healing for Black people and Black culture. You know, Black people have endured hundreds of years of slavery, racism, and persecution. And those 100 years of trauma didn't come with hundreds of years of support for mental health and wellness. Even still, we struggle with that level of support. Now it's a struggle across the country, maybe even across the world. And so music was an outlet, a source of hope, of healing, a place where sorrow and grief could be shared and understood. And that's what you'll hear a lot in the music, is that sharing. I think that's why African American music specifically is so relatable and relatable to the masses, even those that don't necessarily understand the language. They can feel a sense of the pain and the triumph and the hope. I think it's just so present in the music. And I feel like I hear it most in gospel. But anyway, I digress from that. Eden, I want to say I appreciate your vulnerability about feeling erased, and the difficulty with becoming loud again. I think those are gems of vulnerability and observation and analysis, is that when we feel like we've been erased, it becomes very difficult to become loud again, to be heard again, right? And so when you see these protests, when you see riots, riots is the sound of the unheard, the sound of the voiceless. It's very similar to what Morrison says when she talks about children have committed tongue suicide, right? And they've bitten their tongues, and they've traded their voices for bullets. And it's an unfortunate truth. But that's what happens when people feel unheard, when people feel voiceless. They become violent, right? That level of emotion has to come out somewhere, right? That energy has to come out somewhere. And if we choose to silence our children, to silence those around us, the marginalized, we will continue to see violence. There won't be an end to mass shootings. There won't be an end. There will be another way, another form of violence if we restrict guns. Now, I'm not implying that we shouldn't restrict guns to some extent. I understand that there are various views on that, but my point is that the issue is that we're not listening or hearing or tending to our children, the people that are marginalized, the people that are being abused and hurt. And I find your vulnerability, Eden, to kind of trigger those feelings about that in me, because how easy we can feel anger and violence and pain when we are being erased and unheard and silenced. Marco, I also appreciated your honesty and vulnerability about your personal experience with language, but also your thoughts on your generation. Those are really valuable points, right? Not only just you sharing like, hey, yeah, I got lost in this mindless, media dump of social media today for longer than I care to admit. I've been caught up in the fake news. I thought that was so valuable to our space here about language, because once you realize that you're caught up in that, once you realize you're not necessarily doing the positive things or interacting with language in an effective or positive way, now now the bird is literally in your hands, because it's in your hands, right? Before you may not have known, but now you know. And Morrison is asking you, challenging you to ask yourself, well, what will you do now? Now that you know, what will you do? And your thoughts on your generation. are so valuable to our conversation, and I appreciate you sharing that because it gives those of us that are not a part of this generation and it's sort of an in-depth look at what it is and what it feels like to be a part of this generation. You know, this generation has inherited 80 plus years of shit, right? And I find this generation to be a bit about the healing generation, right? Because there has been so many generations before that have dealt with the traumas and in an indirect way, right? They've tried to overlook the traumas, and whereas this generation is saying, hey, we got a lot of trauma, we need to stop doing this and this and this, and that creates challenges for previous generations that weren't willing to do that or weren't strong enough to do those things. So I really appreciate that, Marco. I hope many of you, including you, Marco, continue to bring those perspectives to this discussion. Benjamin, I also liked your perspective, your example on big pharma in America, because big pharma is the true war on drugs, right? You know, our government's history would like you to believe that the war on drugs is a street drug war, right? Though most of those drugs are allowed into this country. I repeat, most of those drugs are allowed into this country, right? The issue is pharmaceutical companies are not viewed in the same way, despite them causing harm, right? Despite them contributing to our opioid epidemic here in America, no one is being brought to justice for those crimes. However, we do punish street level drug dealers exponentially slow, exponentially so. What I find most interesting about that is the class, race, and gender of those two parties, the low-level drug dealer and the owners and operators of big pharma. Alma, you know, your mentioning of Me Too, your understanding of history, and your points about the importance of sharing struggles, even in success, is, I think they were also so important and valuable to what we're trying to do here in this class, not just with Toni Morrison, but what we're going to do moving forward, right? Because what we're trying to understand here is not just the history that we were never taught, but what that means to contemporary issues, the contemporary things that we're dealing with, the issues that we're trying to navigate at various ages. Like if you look in this classroom, excuse me, there are people older than me, there are people my age, there are people much younger than me. There are students in here that are still in high school, right? So our age gap is like 16 to 50, right? And so you have people from varying generations struggling with a lot of the same issues, from different backgrounds, from different education levels at different periods of their life, right? But it's the sharing of our struggles in here that will help us grow. Not only grow our knowledge, but grow our minds and hearts and our ability to be contributing members of our communities. And I'm not just talking about your neighborhood. I'm talking about your family community, your friend community, your extracurricular communities, your neighborhood, your city, your county, your state, your country, right? Those are all communities we're a part of. And it's important for us to value those spaces and to share our struggles so that we understand that the person living next to us, regardless of what their views are on X, Y, and Z, are still dealing with a lot of the same shit that we are. And we have common ground, right? And we need to share our common ground, share our struggles, and share our successes, and we can build up our community together. And a lot of what you had to say, Alma, especially about the Me Too movement, and, you know, without those brave women, brave people sharing their stories, right? Sharing their struggles, sharing their experiences with oppression, how many more would go voiceless, right? That's why agency and voice, and the written language is so valuable and important. One of the things that really intrigued me in our discussion was Yvette's point about the shift of language from child, teen to adult. And I think it's a profound observation because it doesn't really get talked about enough, right? Because as children, we often put children in this space to be seen and not heard. You know, children are often quite curious, ask a lot of questions, ask questions about subjects that as adults we may not be ready to discuss with them or not know how to discuss with them, and so we avoid it, right? And so then they become teenagers who are asked to be more responsible, to be more adult, to engage more, and we haven't prepared them for that as the adults of our society, of our communities. We haven't prepared them. And so then if we don't prepare them as teens, or if they don't grow enough as teens, they become adults. They become immature adults, immature in thought, immature in emotionality, immature in expression, right? And it's our faults because we've kept them voiceless for so long. We've kept them quiet for so long. We've shut down their curiosities because we told them they weren't ready. And so the only way they learn, the only way many of us have learned is through experience, and a lot of times through hardships. And I'm not saying all of the hardships can be avoided if we talk to our children more, but I imagine life, love, and our communities would be a lot better if we did. If we did feed into their knowledge a little bit younger, if we did try to express the positives and negatives, the dark and the light of the world at an earlier age, how lovely that would be if we could do it together. Mark, Mark, you mentioned how language. You emphasize the importance of language, both written and spoken, and I think more often than not, people have trouble with one or the other, but they're so interconnected. It's hard for me to fully express, which is kind of interesting. It's hard for me to fully express that I value spoken language more than written language. Because I value them so much, but I value spoken language more because I find that most people's traumas come from things that were said to them or done to them. And we've become so loose with language. We've become so careless with language that we have begun to harm so many around us. So I urge you to start considering the language you use with those you love, those you don't know, those you know, and just be more mindful of it. The last few thoughts kind of connect a little bit. Emily, you talked about how children aren't taught enough about life, and that really connects with what Yvette was talking about with that shift, right? We're just not teaching enough. And so I really thought those connections are important because we're not teaching our children enough about life. And I think that's why we have so many children turning to tongue suicide and using bullets instead, which is another contemporary social issue, right? Gun violence in schools. But to kind of cap off this conversation, Alex and Olivia, you both said two things that really have stuck with me and are going to probably stick with me for the rest of this week. Alex, you asked a lot of good questions, but the one thing you said that stuck with me the most was there's no benefit in hiding the truth. And so I think that's what I try to do here, is shed light on the truth, no matter how bright or dark it may be. And I don't force it on you. I don't force my perspectives on you per se, but I allow you the space to decide what this truth means to you. right? How you will digest it. And you're free to do it however you want. If it's different from mine, I have no issues with that. If it's the same as mine, great. But I think it's valuable that you all understand that there is no benefit for anybody in hiding the truth. We don't get to learn from that. And Olivia, you said that, you know, you talked about, gosh, I'm so blanking on these notes. I'm sorry. You talked about the age and learning and how it's. What did my notes say here? Sheesh, I'm blanking here. It's hard to learn. Gosh, what did you say? It's hard to learn. I'm sorry, Olivia. I'm totally blanking here. My apologies to everyone, including Olivia. It was such an important point to what we were discussing, and I'm hoping that it comes to me within the next couple of seconds. But let me see if I can find it here really quick because I don't want to leave without this point because it was really, really, it really stuck with me. Oh, that age and learning are sort of like irrelevant, right? That the younger can learn from the older, and the older can learn from the younger. And I think that's why I've constructed the space for you in this way, because I learn from all of you. Every quarter, every class, I learn something new, and it makes me so much better moving forward as an instructor, as a person, because I get to learn what you all need. I get to learn what I can do better. I get to learn what information sticks with you. I get to learn your perspectives, and I get to grow because I was brought up in a certain generation, but this new generation is the future, present and the future. And so I need to learn what's going on, how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, because I don't want to be left behind. Because what's behind is history, and it's not great. And I want to be a part of something better, and I think we can achieve that in the future. So I hope you all understand that. Please thank you for my patience. Again, sorry, Olivia, for forgetting, but I'm glad I got it in. Have a great week. I know this video was a little longer, probably because I took a little long to figure out what I was trying to remember about Olivia, but thank you all for your time, and have a great week.